The hotel room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Daniel sat on the edge of a neatly made bed, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks for the 10th time. The mirror reflected a man who should have been calm, poised, someone about to marry the love of his life. But the eyes staring back at him told another story. There was unease, a deep knot in his chest he couldn't untangle. On the dresser lay a single bouquet of white roses, untouched, still wrapped in paper. The soft scent of lilies drifted from the bathroom, a reminder that Emily was supposed to be there, getting ready, laughing, sharing nerves like she always did. But today, the laughter was absent. The room felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were aware of a tension Daniel couldn't yet name. His phone vibrated. A text, short, unfamiliar. "I can't go through with this." Daniel's fingers froze. He reread it, hoping somehow he had misread the words, hoping they were a cruel joke. But the text stayed the same, chilling in its simplicity. The world outside the window, the bustling city, the morning sun glinting off the high-rises, continued as if nothing had changed. And yet, for Daniel, everything had shifted in an instant. Memories flashed unbidden. 10 years. 10 years of laughter, late-night arguments, whispered secrets in half-dark rooms. The little moments he had taken for granted now seemed weighty with meaning. He remembered the nights she would stay up, writing in her journal, eyes wide and thoughtful, as if carrying a world inside her that he would never fully see. And now, in this moment, he understood that perhaps he never had. The door creaked slightly, he startled, and glanced toward it, half expecting Emily to appear bright and apologetic. But it remained closed. The quiet pressed down on him, each tick of the clock amplifying his anxiety. The uncertainty clawed at him. The life he thought he knew teetered on the edge of unraveling. Daniel rose, pacing the room in restless circles, his mind cycling through every possible explanation, every hidden clue he might have missed. But the harder he tried to grasp the truth, the more it slipped away, like sand through his fingers. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a shadow of dread he couldn't shake. Today, the day he had waited for, might be the day everything changed. And in that silence, heavy and suffocating, Daniel realized he was alone. Not just in a room, but in a story that had been building beneath the surface for years. The truth, it seemed, was waiting for him just outside that door. The memory of that first evening together was still sharp in Daniel's mind. 10 years ago, Emily had walked into his life with a quiet confidence, her laughter filling the room like sunlight spilling through a window. He had been captivated, not just by her beauty, but by the warmth and intensity that seemed to pulse behind her eyes. Back then, love had felt simple. Shared dinners, whispered dreams, and stolen weekend getaways where the world outside didn't exist. But as the years passed, the simplicity faded, replaced by subtle cracks he hadn't noticed, or perhaps had chosen to ignore. Arguments that had seemed trivial at the time now revealed themselves as early warning signs. Emily's moods could shift without warning, a cloud settling over her usually radiant presence. Daniel often found himself walking on eggshells, unsure when a small comment might ignite a storm. The laughter remained, but it had grown quieter, punctuated by long silences that neither of them knew how to bridge. There were moments that still haunted him. Emily's late-night disappearances to meet a friend. The way her phone sometimes seemed to hold more secrets than conversations. The fleeting glances she cast at strangers that made Daniel's chest tighten with a vague unease he couldn't name. At the time, he had rationalized it all. Stress at work, the pressure of wedding planning, or simply the ebbs and flows of any long-term relationship. But now, with the cryptic text from that morning still lingering, he realized that his explanations had been convenient lies he told himself to maintain peace. He recalled evenings spent in the quiet of their apartment, where Emily would stare out the window, lost in thought. She never shared the weight of her silence, only offered vague smiles and fleeting reassurances. Daniel, in his love and devotion, had often dismissed these moments, unaware that beneath them lay desires and conflicts he could not yet perceive. As he sat on the edge of the couch, lost in reflection, Daniel began to see the patterns that had eluded him for a decade. Every laugh that felt like warmth, every touch that felt like connection, had been layered with subtle tension and restraint. The truth was becoming clear. Their decade together had not been merely a story of love. It had been a tapestry woven with hidden doubts, unspoken betrayals, and shadows that only now were coming into focus. He exhaled slowly, the weight of realization pressing down. The calm facade of his life with Emily had always concealed a complex web of secrets. And just beyond the edge of memory, another layer waited. The part of their story he had yet to uncover. Some shadows, he realized, were darker than he had ever imagined, and the next one belonged closer to home than he dared suspect. Daniel had always liked Emily's sister, Anna, bright, vivacious, and seemingly innocent. On the surface, she was everything Daniel could admire. Warm laughter, easy charm, a kindness that drew people in. But now, as he watched her move through preparations for the wedding, something felt off. There was a glimmer in her eyes that made him pause, a subtle intensity that hadn't been there before, or perhaps he had simply never noticed. Emily and Anna shared a closeness that often seemed impenetrable, a bond woven through years of shared secrets and whispered advice. But Daniel began to notice small things, lingering touches, a glance too quick to be casual, moments when Anna's smile seemed almost conspiratorial. He dismissed it at first, blaming nerves or the excitement of the day. Yet, deep down, an uncomfortable suspicion began to creep in, the kind that settled like frost over a window pane. Quiet, slow, and chilling. He remembered a few weeks ago, seeing Anna and Marcus, her boyfriend, laughing in a corner of a cafe, their heads close together, voices low. Something in the way Emily's eyes had followed them, or perhaps didn't follow them, had left a faint unease in Daniel's chest. Back then, he had ignored it, telling himself he was imagining things. Now, with Emily's absence this morning, the memory felt like a warning. Daniel tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on the bustle around him. Florists arranging bouquets, caterers moving trays of hors d'oeuvres, guests beginning to arrive in elegant dresses and suits. Yet Anna's presence lingered at the edge of his consciousness. Every laugh she offered seemed sharper, every glance more calculated. He couldn't shake the idea that behind that cheerful exterior, she was holding a secret that could unravel everything he thought he knew about Emily. And then it hit him. The realization that the next layer of this tangled story might not come from strangers or distant friends, but from someone so close to home that Daniel would have sworn impossible. A sister, a confidant, someone he trusted. Some smiles, he realized, are meant to hide more than they reveal, and some secrets are closer than you ever think. The air in Emily's childhood home was heavy with anticipation, thick enough to choke. Outside, the garden bloomed under the morning sun, white petals catching the light. But inside, shadows clung to the corners of the rooms. Daniel had never been here often. He had known the house as a place of family gatherings, laughter, and celebration. But today, walking through quiet hallways in search of Emily, he felt as if he were trespassing into a world he had never fully understood. Emily's absence at the hotel gnawed at him, each unanswered call and text amplifying his anxiety. And yet, it wasn't just her disappearance that unsettled him. It was the fleeting, fragmented memories he could no longer ignore. The late-night messages she had typed and deleted. The secretive phone calls that ended the moment he entered the room. The way her eyes sometimes darted toward Marcus and Anna when they were nearby. He had always rationalized these moments, dismissed them as coincidences, or attributed them to stress. But now, alone in the silent house, the rationalizations felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. In the kitchen, Daniel paused, listening. A soft murmur of voices floated to the half-closed door at the back of the house. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was intimate, urgent, something that made his stomach knot with unease. Emily, Marcus, Anna. The names swirled together in his mind, a toxic cocktail of suspicion and dread. He had to know, but the fear of what he might find rooted him to the spot. He remembered Emily's smile from years past, radiant, comforting, an unspoken promise that everything was right in the world. But as he pressed closer to the doorway, he realized that the same smile might have been a mask all along. Masks for guilt, for desire, for secrets he could never have imagined. Every subtle gesture, every word left unsaid over the past decade, now took on a new meaning, a warning he had ignored until it was too late. Daniel wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but his fear of shattering whatever fragile illusion remained held him back. The whispers behind that closed door were a reminder that intimacy could hide betrayal, and that love sometimes came with hidden costs. His mind raced, piecing together moments he had dismissed as insignificant. A lingering touch, a secret laugh, a glance held too long. Each memory now felt like a puzzle piece of a picture he didn't want to see. And yet, as the minutes stretched into silence again, Daniel realized the truth was inevitable. The fragile balance of his life, the relationship he had built for 10 years, was tilting, and the coming revelation would change everything. He could no longer ignore the shadows lurking behind closed doors, the unspoken confessions that awaited him, or the moral ambiguities of a heart divided. Some truths, he knew, were whispered only when no one is listening, and the ones he needed most would soon be impossible to escape. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the hotel ballroom, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers in tiny shards of brilliance. To anyone else, it looked like the perfect day for a wedding. Flowers in full bloom, tables elegantly set, and guests began to filter in with polite chatter. But to Daniel, the world felt off kilter, the perfection of the scene only amplifying the gnawing sense that everything was about to fall apart. He had watched Emily all morning from a distance, or rather, the absence of her. She had not yet arrived. His mind replayed fragments of the last weeks, the fleeting moments that now seemed like warning signs. The secretive texts that came when he wasn't looking, the hushed conversations with Marcus, the way her eyes sometimes lingered on Anna longer than necessary. Each memory was a thread in a fraying tapestry, one he could no longer ignore. Daniel's heart raced as he tried to rationalize, to convince himself that Emily's absence was a simple delay, a minor nervousness before walking down the aisle. But instinct, that sharp, unrelenting voice, told him otherwise. There was something hidden, something dangerous to his understanding of the life he thought he shared with her. A decade of trust, love, and shared dreams now felt like a fragile illusion, ready to crumble with the slightest pressure. He recalled the quiet nights in their apartment where Emily would sit by the window, lost in thought. At the time, he had brushed it off as introspection, but now it seemed more like preparation. Subtle steps taken toward an invisible destination. Daniel's stomach twisted. The truth he feared was not just about Emily's indecision, but about a desire she had nurtured in silence, a desire he had never been part of. The guests began to settle into their seats, laughter and conversation floating through the grand hall, unaware of the tension simmering just outside the doors. Daniel paced in the lobby, clutching a glass of untouched champagne, replaying every interaction over the last 10 years. The more he remembered, the more he saw the careful balancing act Emily had maintained between loyalty and something else. Something forbidden, something he was only beginning to glimpse. He remembered Marcus' face in fleeting moments. Friendly, charming, ordinary in every way except in the quiet corners where Daniel now realized he had been invisible. It was a slow, painful revelation. The past decade had contained a secret he had never anticipated, hidden behind smiles, polite conversation, and the routine comfort of daily life. As the clock ticked toward the hour of the ceremony, Daniel felt a tightening in his chest, a premonition that the fragile construct of their relationship was about to collapse. The carefully orchestrated world around him was beautiful, yes, but it masked an emotional storm that was now unavoidable. The unraveling had begun, and there was no turning back. Sometimes, the closer you are to someone, the less you truly see. And today, what Daniel was about to discover would change everything. The cafe was nearly empty. The quiet hum of conversation, a muted backdrop to the storm swirling between Emily and Marcus. A single lamp cast a pool of warm light over their table, creating shadows that seemed to lean in, listening, absorbing the unspoken truths between them. Outside, the city moved with its usual energy, cars honking, pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks. But inside, time had slowed, each second stretching into an eternity. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee cup. She looked at Marcus, her eyes a mixture of fear, longing, and guilt. "I can't go through with it," she whispered, the words a fragile thread barely holding together the truth she had been hiding for months. Marcus reached across the table, covering her hands with his own. His touch was both comforting and complicating, a reminder of a connection that had grown in shadows nurtured in secrecy. "You don't have to," he said softly, though even he felt the weight of what they were contemplating. "But you need to be honest with yourself, with him." Emily's lips quivered. "I love him. In some ways I always will. But I can't lie anymore. Not today. Not ever. It's not just about us. It's about everything I've been hiding all these years. The lies, the silences, the moments I thought nobody was watching but weren't." Her voice cracked, and she lowered her gaze, tears catching the light in the dim room. Marcus squeezed her hands gently. "You've carried this alone for too long. I felt it too. Every day we pretended it didn't exist. But now it's here. It's real. And we have to decide what to do before it consumes us entirely." Daniel's face appeared in her mind, nervous, hopeful, unaware. The man she had loved, promised her life to, had trusted her completely. The thought twisted inside her, a knot of guilt and fear. Could she take the step, betray the life she had built for 10 years, and embrace something forbidden? The question loomed like a shadow she could not escape. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The quiet of the cafe pressed in, a mirror to the quiet that had always existed between Daniel and Emily. The unspoken doubts, the half-hidden desires, the truths they had avoided. Emily finally spoke, her voice low but resolute. "I can't pretend anymore. I have to follow this, whatever it is, wherever it leads, even if it destroys everything I've known." Marcus nodded, eyes somber but understanding. "Then we face it together. But we must be careful. What happens next changes everything. Nothing will be the same." Emily swallowed hard, her heart hammering in her chest. She had reached the edge of a decision that would alter lives forever. The whispers of guilt and desire, of love and betrayal, had led her to this moment, and there was no turning back. Some confessions are safe only in shadows, and the shadows have grown long enough to swallow everything else. The grand hall shimmered with perfection. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above rows of white chairs, flowers in every corner filling the air with a sweet, delicate scent. Guests whispered in hushed excitement, their anticipation building to a crescendo as music began to play softly, signaling the start of the ceremony. To everyone present, it was the day of a beautiful wedding. To Daniel, however, the room felt like a gilded cage. He stood at the altar, hands clenching and unclenching, heart hammering against his ribs. Every detail was as it should be. The aisle lined with petals, the velvet ribbons catching the morning light, and the faces of friends and family turned toward him with expectation and joy. And yet, there was an emptiness gnawing at him, a sense that the world he had carefully constructed for 10 years was about to collapse. Emily's absence had been a slow, gnawing anxiety all morning. But now, as the ceremony began and the doors remained closed, that anxiety had hardened into dread. He could see her image in his mind. The soft curve of her smile, the warmth of her hands in his, the late-night conversations where secrets had been hinted at but never spoken aloud. Today, all of it seemed to hang by the thinnest thread, ready to snap. Outside, the morning sun glinted off Marcus' watch, a subtle reminder that the forbidden connection had not vanished, that the secrets of the past weeks were about to surface in the most public way imaginable. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had felt it before, that faint, impossible unease, but never with this intensity. It was as if a storm had been building behind the doors, and now it was breaking through. The murmurs of the guests grew louder. Flowers shimmered in the light. And then the doors opened. Daniel's heart leapt, only to halt. She was not alone. Emily walked slowly, deliberately, but not toward him. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, whose expression mirrored the tension in her own. The room fell silent and awkward. Tense pause as every eye followed her. Daniel's throat tightened. Words that felt certain moments ago now seemed impossibly distant. Why, he thought, after 10 years today, the vows, the promises, the future they had planned, all vanished in the space of heartbeat. The music faltered, trailing into an uneasy silence. Emily paused, glanced at Daniel for a fraction of a second. Regret? Pity? He could not tell, and then turned away, stepping toward Marcus with quiet determination. Gasps rippled through the room. The officiant froze mid-word. Friends whispered, mouths covered. some rising to see more clearly. The sense of betrayal was palpable, heavy in the air, and Daniel felt his chest tighten, as though the walls themselves were pressing in. The man he had loved, trusted, and shared a decade of life would have been abandoned, not by circumstance, but by choice. Emily's lips parted, perhaps to explain, perhaps to justify, but no words came that could bridge the chasm she had created. Daniel's mind raced through every memory, every subtle warning he had ignored. It all made sense now. The small lies, the secret glances, the unexplained absences. The truth was cruel, unavoidable, and public. As she left the room with Marcus, Daniel stood frozen, a spectator to the unraveling of the life he thought he knew. The guests murmured, some shocked, some sympathetic, but none could soften the blow that had shattered everything. Outside, the world continued, indifferent to heartbreak and betrayal. Inside, Daniel realized that some moments leave marks so deep they linger forever. Sometimes, the life you believe is yours can vanish in a single step, and the echoes of that loss stretch far beyond the moment it occurs. The grand hall, once brimming with anticipation and soft music, had transformed into a cavern of stunned murmurs and awkward glances. Chairs remained half-occupied, bouquets lay forgotten, and the scent of lilies mingled with the bitter taste of shock. Daniel stood frozen at the altar, his gaze following Emily and Marcus as they disappeared through the doors, their figures swallowed by the sunlight outside. The sound of the city continued, indifferent, as if the moment of devastation had existed in a parallel world only he could perceive. Minutes stretched into hours. Family and friends whispered in corners, hesitant to offer consolation or judgment, unsure of what they had witnessed. Daniel's mother approached him cautiously, her hands trembling as she tried to bridge the chasm between maternal comfort and disbelief. "Daniel, are you okay?" Her voice cracked, and for the first time, he realized how deeply the public humiliation had wounded not only him, but everyone who had cared for him. He shook his head, unable to speak. Memories of the past decade, the laughter, the small gestures of love, the promises whispered in half-dark rooms, rushed at him like a tidal wave. Each memory was now tainted with the realization that he had not fully known the person he had trusted most in his life. Every unnoticed glance, every smile, every subtle omission now carried the weight of betrayal. In the quiet moments that followed, Daniel retreated into himself, walking through the empty corridors of the hotel like a ghost. The world felt muted, colors dulled, sounds distant. He recalled the small signs he had ignored. Emily's secretive phone calls, the late-night messages that disappeared before he had read them, her distant expressions in moments when intimacy should have drawn them together. They had been warnings, threads in a tapestry he had chosen not to unravel. Meanwhile, Emily and Marcus navigated their own labyrinth of guilt and relief. Behind closed doors, the thrill of forbidden desire clashed with the weight of moral ambiguity. Each moment of their union carried the shadow of Daniel's heartbreak, and they both felt the sting of consequence settling in their chests. The secrecy that had once protected them now served as a constant reminder that their choices had tangible costs, emotional, social, and psychological. For Daniel, the aftermath was quieter but no less devastating. Days blurred together. Meals were skipped, conversations avoided, and sleep became an elusive luxury. Friends reached out hesitantly, offering platitudes and support, but none could erase the sense of being unmoored. The betrayal was not just about love lost. It was about trust violated, time wasted, and a profound realization that life could pivot in a single, unimaginable moment. And yet, in the silence of his apartment, amidst the shattered remnants of photographs and memories, Daniel began to notice something subtle, a flicker of understanding. The pain was raw, but it was also a teacher, a lesson whispered in the echo of absence. That trust must be guarded, that perception is never complete, and that some truths, no matter how devastating, are better faced than ignored. The aftermath of silence is never quiet. It lingers in every heartbeat, in every shadow, and in every thought left unspoken, and it demands a reckoning that cannot be postponed. The small cafe felt suffocating, though it was almost empty. The low hum of conversation and the clinking of cups seemed distant to Daniel, as if the world outside had narrowed down to the single point of Emily seated across from him. He hadn't expected this meeting, Hadn't imagined he could summon the courage to confront the woman who had upended his life. And yet, here he was heart-hammering, hands clenched in his lap, searching for words that might make sense of chaos. Emily looked different than he remembered. Her face softened by guilt and worry, but her eyes still carried that intensity that had drawn him to her 10 years ago. For a brief moment, he wondered if the woman sitting across from him was the same person who had whispered promises in dark rooms, shared dreams on quiet nights, and laughed with him as though the world belonged only to them. Now, those shared years felt fragile, suspended in a tension he could barely endure. "Daniel," Emily began, her voice trembling, I don't expect you to understand, but I had to follow something inside me I couldn't ignore. It doesn't erase everything we share, but I can't go back." Daniel's chest tightened. He had rehearsed 1,000 responses, but none captured the storm of hurt, betrayal, and lingering love he still felt. "You chose him," he said finally, the words low, measured, and barely audible. "After 10 years, you walked away for someone else. Do you know what that means?" His voice broke slightly, revealing the raw edge beneath the controlled exterior. Emily's hands reached for his, tentative, as if to bridge the chasm between them, but Daniel recoiled. "I know," she whispered. "I know the hurt, the confusion, the betrayal. And I'm sorry, more than I can ever say. I never wanted to destroy you. I never wanted you to feel this." Daniel stared at her, searching for something, anger, relief, closure, but found only a mixture of heartbreak and understanding. The confrontation was not just about Emily's choice. It was about the accumulation of secrets, lies, and unspoken truths that had stretched across a decade. The reckoning was not easy nor clean. It was messy, painful, and unavoidable. He realized then that his grief was not just for Emily, but for the years of illusions, for the trust he had given freely, and for the life he had imagined with someone who had quietly carried a separate path in her heart. And yet, in the intensity of this confrontation, he also felt the faint stirrings of something else, clarity. The reckoning was necessary, painful as it was, because it forced truth into the open. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned back, letting the silence speak for both of them. Daniel exhaled, feeling the weight of the past decade pressing on him. But also, paradoxically, a strange lightness, the recognition that the truth, however devastating, was finally laid bare. Some reckonings are not about punishment. They are about facing the truth, no matter how painful, and discovering the strength to move forward. Daniel's apartment felt different now. Smaller, quieter, somehow heavier. The echoes of the confrontation with Emily still lingered, weaving through the furniture, clinging to the walls, reminding him of what had been lost and what could never be reclaimed. He wandered from room to room, touching objects that had once held joy. A framed photo of him and Emily laughing in the park, her scarf draped over a chair, the faint scent of her perfume lingering despite the weeks that had passed. Each memory was a delicate shard, beautiful but capable of cutting if held too tightly. He thought about the people who had been by his side through it all, friends who had offered comfort, family who had tried to shield him from the worst of the fallout. Their voices, once comforting, now seemed tinged with unease. The world had changed, and everyone around him was forced to reckon with it too. Daniel realized that healing wasn't just about his own heart. It was about acknowledging the ripple effects of betrayal on those who cared for him. Sleep came fitfully. Nights were haunted by half-remembered conversations, imagined confrontations, and fleeting images of Emily and Marcus together. He woke often, staring at the ceiling, asking himself questions he couldn't answer. Why her? Why now? Could love have survived if she had told me sooner? Each question was a weight pressing on his chest, yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to notice a shift. The edges of the pain softened. Not because the hurt was gone, but because he had started to see it as a teacher, a guide to the maze of human emotion and deception. He started to reclaim small pieces of his life. Mornings spent walking in the quiet park, the rustle of leaves beneath his feet grounding him. Evenings where he read old letters and wrote in a journal, pouring grief, anger, and confusion onto the page. He realized that self-reflection, rather than blame, was the path forward. Trust had been broken, but self-respect and awareness could be rebuilt, piece by careful piece. Daniel thought about Emily, not with the sharp edge of betrayal, but with a quiet understanding. People follow their hearts in ways we may never comprehend, and sometimes those paths diverge painfully. He allowed himself to hope that both he and Emily could find clarity in their fractured lives, even if it meant moving in opposite directions. By the time the evening sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Daniel felt a fragile kind of peace settle over him. The fractured lines in his heart remained, but they no longer dictated the rhythm of his life. He had survived the storm, confronted the truth, and begun to rebuild. Sometimes the hardest fractures create the strongest foundations, if you have the courage to let them teach you how to stand again. Months had passed since the wedding that never was. Daniel walked the quiet streets of the city, the rhythm of his steps echoing against the empty sidewalks. The world had continued without pause, indifferent to the heartbreak that had once consumed him. And yet, in every familiar street corner, every shadowed alley, he felt the faint traces of the past, moments that had shaped him, moments that had cut deeply, and moments that had, in their own way, taught him to see clearly. He revisited places he and Emily had once loved. The park bench where they had shared summer evenings, the small cafe where they had whispered secrets over coffee, the art gallery that held their laughter like music suspended in air. Each space was now tinged with memory, bittersweet yet instructive. The echoes of what had been and what was lost were unavoidable, but Daniel no longer felt imprisoned by them. He could observe them, acknowledge them, and carry the lessons they offer without letting them define him. Emily remained a presence in his thoughts, but the sharp edges of anger and betrayal had dulled. He understood now that her choices had reflected her desires and fears, not a deficiency in him. And Marcus, too, was just another shadow of that complicated chapter, an emblem of human desires and mistakes that could never erase the love and life Daniel had shared, nor the person he had been. In the solitude of reflection, Daniel allowed himself a quiet smile. He had learned that some echoes of the past are meant to guide us, not haunt us. That heartbreak and betrayal, as unbearable as they can be, hold lessons in resilience, self-awareness, and emotional honesty. Every scar, every memory, every fracture of trust had contributed to the man he was becoming, stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the delicate balance between love and truth. As he looked toward the horizon, the city bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, Daniel felt the first stirrings of hope. Life would never be the same, but it could still be meaningful, full, and live with intention. The past would always whisper in echoes, but it no longer had the power to dictate his future. Some echoes of the past linger forever, not to punish, but to remind us that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. Daniel sat alone on the balcony of his apartment, the city stretching beneath him in a canvas of lights and shadows. The night was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic, and for the first time in months, he felt a sense of clarity settle over him. He reflected on the journey he had endured. 10 years of love, the shocking betrayal, the unraveling of his world, and the painstaking process of finding himself again. He thought of Emily, of Marcus, of Anna, and of the ripple effects their choices had created, not just in his life, but in everyone who had been connected to them. Pain had been unavoidable, but it had also been instructive. Daniel realized that the hardest moments often teach the most essential lessons about trust, about boundaries, about noticing the small cracks before they become chasms. Looking back, he understood that love is never simple, and relationships are never without shadows. People carry hidden desires, unspoken fears, and choices that may not align with those who love them most. Yet, these complexities are part of life's lesson. Awareness, communication, and emotional honesty are as crucial as love itself. Daniel's final thought lingered on the audience he imagined. People watching, listening, reflecting. Sometimes, he would say, you won't see the cracks in someone's heart, even after years together. But what you can control is your own integrity, your own capacity to understand, forgive, and grow. Never ignore the small signs. Protect your heart and honor your truth. He closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him, feeling the fractures in his heart begin to mend, not erased but made stronger by the lessons they carried. The story he had lived was now a story he could share, not for pity or vengeance, but to illuminate the fragile, beautiful, and often painful truths of human relationships. The shadows of the past may always linger, but they teach us that clarity, courage, and self-respect are the lights that guide us forward.